Vladimir Putin is a loser. He'd been in power for 25 years, and look what he's done to Russia. He was just a secret policeman in Berlin. The Berlin Wall fell, and Putin didn't like it. No, he wanted the KGB to stay in power. That's what he wanted. So he went back to Russia, and he worked his way up to a position of power. He did some favors for some people. And then he took over from Boris Yeltsin. And he's basically been in power for 25 years. Way too long. And we all know what one-man rule does to a country after about 25 years or less. No, he destroyed what started out as a democracy. It didn't last long, but he destroyed that democracy. He created a bunch of oligarchs, and then Russia became the country with the greatest disparity in wealth among all the nations. He invited foreign investors into Russia, and those foreign direct investors regretted it because after they got in there, Putin would put the squeeze to them or take away what he gave them or, get the assets back or confiscate or something. 20 years ago, Putin tried to affect the political situation in Ukraine. He wanted to select their president. But what happened? The Ukrainian people staged the Orange Revolution. Putin's puppet had to leave and go back to Moscow. And Ukraine got the leaders that they wanted. Loser? Putin. Liar? Putin. He's lied from start to finish about everything. So in 2014, he invades Crimea, and that was a move very typical of the Adolf Hitlers of the world. And we put on some sanctions. I wish we'd made stronger sanctions at that time, but we didn't. And Putin, was popular with the Russian people for taking Crimea, just like the German people were happy with Hitler when he took France and Western Europe. But look at Crimea now. So, all this time, Putin is killing people. They started calling it sudden Russian death syndrome because the oligarchs and his opponents and anybody that opposed his regime ended up dead. A lot of people fell out of windows, and there were some suicides too. This last guy committed suicide with 6 bullet holes in the back of his head. No, it's interesting too who Putin kills. He kills anti-corruption politicians, anti-corruption journalists, anybody that opposes his regime. He doesn't have to kill that many people either. He kills, a couple every year or so. But the economy rocks along with his very extractive, exploitative, kleptocracy that he built up. So then 2022, Putin is frustrated. He wants to control Ukraine. He couldn't do it after the Orange Revolution, so he invades. And that was the dumbest thing he could have done. Right after he invaded, it became obvious that his military was so corrupt that the men going into that invasion didn't know what they were doing there. They didn't know that it was an invasion. They were just told to go. They didn't have food for them. Their tires went flat. They didn't know how to work their equipment, and they were sitting ducks on that highway. And that's where Ukraine started bumping them off with drones. And Ukraine has gotten ever more skillful at destroying Russian assets with drones, as we've seen a lot in the last 6 months. But Putin couldn't quit. His army was demoralized. He withdrew, and then he brought all his troops around to the southeast part where there's a Russian-friendly area there. And he'd been fighting a civil war secretly there for a few years. And so then they invade down there. And that's where the fighting goes on. And Putin has taken some territory that rightfully belongs to Ukraine there. But in the process, he's now losing 1,000 people a day. He has to recruit 35,000 a month just to keep his numbers up. And they're all cannon fodder. They don't give them any training. They just send them out there. Because Putin is okay with just endless frontal, futile assaults where the Russians get wiped out and a few Ukrainians get killed, and that's bad. But he cannot sustain those kind of losses. And the morale of the Russian army right now is pitiful. They've been mutinies, defections to Ukraine, and some of these small groups they're sending over, all of them surrendered to Ukraine. Thousands have surrendered to Ukraine because the morale is so terrible. And Putin has to pay anybody signing up for the army huge bonuses. And they pay them like $3,500 a month, which is a lot of money in Russia, in rubles, And that's costing him money. And Putin's about run out of money. Nobody's going to loan him any money. So Putin continues to lose. He started out threatening Sweden and Finland. He sent jets over there hoping they would not join NATO. Well, they joined NATO. So the loser was Putin again. He sent drones over Poland recently. Now, what happened? Poland stopped all the trains at the border, and China got very upset, and they put the pressure on Putin, I'm sure, and probably are backing off from their support of Putin. Putin tried to affect the election in Moldova. What happened? The loser was Putin. They voted for Europe, not Putin's candidates. So right now, Ukraine is kicking Russia's butt. And I love it. They just blew up a big missile depot with a bunch of missiles in it. They just blew up a factory that made the two main types of explosives for their shells and their bombs and everything. And some of these drone strikes were enormous, and the industrial facilities in the depot destroyed were big. I mean, it wasn't just a little simple one drone strike. They sent a whole horde of drones after them. And the Ukrainians have figured out how to send them in echelons, and they fool the Russians, and they go into the radar screen, and they blow up the radar stations. No, Ukraine's winning, and they're doing it by blowing up Russian refineries. The Russian refining capacity has dropped by 40%. The Russian people don't like it. I don't know what's going to happen to their trucking industry over there, and I think additional refineries will be destroyed. And people say, well, gosh, why didn't Putin compromise? He ought to make a deal. Well, there's a problem. According to historical precedent, personalized dictatorships fight to the bitter end. And that means Putin regards this war as an existential factor for him. In other words, if he doesn't win this war, he's not going to exist anymore. They'll get rid of him. They'll bump him off. So he wants to stay alive, and he's willing to sacrifice, 1 million Russian lives and casualties and deaths, and ruin the Russian economy. They've got 20% interest rates now. And here's the last straw, I think. The Russian state bank has recently said that if Putin doesn't stop seizing the assets of private companies, they will turn into a Soviet-styled command economy and not private enterprise. That's a state bank in Russia said that. So you know the end is near. Putin's a loser, and he's going to lose the war. He'd probably end up losing his life. He's trying to put his own family in positions of power, but yeah, it's going to be futile. He's changing all the chairs. He's trying to organize, but he's a goner. Now, there was a famous Greek historian, one of the first historians, Herodotus, and the theme of his histories was that a free people will triumph over the greatest of dictatorships and tyrannies. And that's what's going to happen here. Glory to Ukraine. Glory to Ukraine. Glory to Ukraine.